Nau mai hoki mai ki other fold e mihi nei, ko Duncan Greive talking ingoa. This episode is brought to you by our partners, by the Fold's very generous sponsors at O Media, who are putting together a package of an event based around sustainability, which honestly is very, I think to a lot of people, and this is part of the challenge, right, is that it can seem quite yawn-inducing or scary or like you name it, especially during, and we really get into this, like a time when, the cost of living crisis can feel such a more immediate challenge than all of the bundle of issues that sit under sustainability. So what I've tried to do with this, we've got two exceptional guests, Nikki Wright, who founded Wright Communications to address exactly these topics, but did it in 2006, which I think, you know how bone deep someone's kind of passion and commitment is when they've been in that space, and they founded it way before the sort of the societal impetus came around to the extent it is now. And also joined by David Robertson from Hardwired, which really, really interesting business that works with other organizations to use behavioral psychology, neuroscience, to basically kind of help them create a more of an emotional connection that will kind of push through some of these quite knotty and complex topics. So they're two real experts in this space, and they're also just, this is not a passing fad to them. This is not something they picked up in the last couple of years. This runs pretty deep, and I think over the past year, and Nikki makes reference to the surveys which sort of bear this out. There's this sense that maybe we got in over our skis on sustainability. The emphasis got too much. This is both at a sort of political and a kind of a business level. And I think what both of them do, and this is why I've actually been wanting to have people from the kind of communications field on this podcast for a while, is like, how do you cut through that? Because that matters to journalists. Like the incentives around publishing climate change journalism, if people don't read it, become pretty low. That matters to people working in comms within organizations, whether they're facing inwards or outwards. There's not many parts of the broad media infrastructure that don't have to sort of pay attention to this, particularly as the sort of legal framework that governs and starts to try and point us towards a lower emissions future that is kind of less destructive to the planet we're standing on really kicks into gear. So that's basically the fundamental nature of this conversation. It's with two really, really strong practitioners in the area, Nikki Wright from Wright Communications and David Robertson from Hardwired on the Fold. Nikki, David, tēnā korua, and welcome to the Fold.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thank you, yeah.
Nikki, I wonder if you could start by telling me about the founding impetus for Wright Communications.
Yeah, there were two major things, really. May 2006, I'd watched Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth, and I have to say that really, it lit a fire inside me. It was so confronting. At the time, I was working in corporate communications and really in highly regulated industries, oil, pharmaceuticals. These companies have amazing management systems, and I was focusing on corporate social responsibility for them. So I was doing the CSR, but I was thinking it would be amazing to do the same kind of work, but for companies that were more inclined to be doing the right thing in general. So for me, it was about, December that year, I had basically decided I'm going to set up my own agency, and I sold my VW Golf that I had been working really hard to pay for. I bought 4 computers and a Cisco phone system and upskilled myself on FSC certification and got some business cards printed with veggie inks and rented some space at Servcorp on level 27 of the PwC tower in downtown Auckland. And Wright Communications was born, and we set up to serve companies that were really engaged in sustainability and needing help communicating that mission.
It's so interesting, right? Because, feels still like a pregnant, evolving kind of conversation, but also what you're describing is, happened almost 20 years ago now. What was the general market reaction to it? Were you the sort of first or among the first in this space? And how did the sort of, when you took the proposition to people, what was the reaction?
Well, there was a growing membership of organisations joining Sustainable Business Network and what was then the New Zealand Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is the Sustainable Business Council today. And, there were a number of companies. Yes, there weren't many specialising in the PR side of things. So there were entrepreneurial companies doing the mahi, Eco Store, Urgent Couriers were carbon neutral, Toyota, these were companies that were all proactive and doing things, but they didn't have a dedicated comms agency helping tell those sustainable stories. So we felt very supportive, and the likes of Toyota, they were our first major company, and they have been loyal to us ever since. And over the last 17 years, we've really challenged each other. But Steve Benici, founder of Urgent Couriers, he was championing the living wage back then. So, yeah. It's
quite fascinating, right? Because you sort of, Urgent is quite a classic example because it's a highly competitive industry. It's one where you'd think that absent regulation, you're essentially imposing costs on yourself, which your competitor can just ignore and potentially gain a price advantage. How have they been able to sort of survive and thrive while kind of taking on that journey, do you think?
I think it is a challenging market, absolutely, and not everyone's prepared to pay a price premium. However, there are companies who do care and will pay extra to do the right thing. And we've seen that increasingly as companies start measuring Scope 3 emissions. They are looking at their supply chain. They are looking to make choices where it may not be the best, the cheapest, but it enables them to reduce their carbon footprint. So the planet wins is, it's important.
Yeah, it is. So David, you founded Hardwired, which is a consultancy focused on, behavioural psychology, which, is obviously a very important and not necessarily emerging, but in the context of New Zealand, it's a relatively specialised discipline. Tell me about where that came from and where you sort of, or how you interact with your clients.
Yeah, I think not a dissimilar story to Nikki, really. What drove me founding Hardwired was seeing businesses and their customers and businesses, this yawning chasm emerging where neither were connecting to one another, and I think that there was basically a general lose-lose. The customers were not getting the relationship nor the value that they wanted from a business, and certainly businesses were not connecting to customers, and that if anything, it's just increased. And as economic pressure has increased, that's you're seeing a lot of businesses just really struggling. And so what we were seeing was, or what I was certainly seeing was the business being dehumanized, and what I was really fascinated with was, I had been working with for some time, was psychology of people, whether that's at a cultural level or at a customer level or inside a business level, and the emotional hardwiring of those people. And so we as human beings, we're hardwired to do what we do, whether we choose to do it or not, like fight or flight, And so what we were seeing was that if we could humanize the relationship between customers and businesses, then some remarkable things could and would occur. And that's really where we are. So we're quite we're very new to applying it to business. There's not many people that have got using behavioural economics at a business level. There's quite a lot of research around that, but not at a business level.
I mean, in terms of your case studies, there's a frequent reference to this idea of an emotional connection that a client or a customer might make to a business, which people can be cynical about, but obviously we're all probably familiar with examples where it actually feels real and has profound impacts on the business. Are there examples, or is there an example of a client that you've worked with where the sort of insights that you've delivered or the research that you've uncovered has had that kind of an impact and sort of had an actual tangible impact on the sort of way they conduct themselves and how they articulate that?
Yeah, look, I think that's our world with all of our clients. So if we're not achieving that, I think we're not really not getting where we need to get to. I think the thing we're talking about here is a paradigm shift. So businesses are, and I think sustainability is very much in this space. The paradigm shift for both parties, for both customers, consumers, and also businesses, and the skepticism that customers quite rightly have with some businesses who are trying very hard to use value-based and purpose-based marketing without meaning it. And so I think that's where the skepticism comes from. However, when it's done authentically and done well, we have a term, we call it "we're together," where a business and its customers feel that they're in this together, and what that together means that they're both the role as a customer is supporting a societal or community value, and the business benefits and the customers benefit. And so the types of businesses that we've had really good success with is MitaQ is a cellular science business, and it's built a very, very powerful business, very successful business with its customers in the US. Convita, we've just done some work with them and taking nature and Manuka honey in a very sustainable approach and bringing US customers into the fold and really generating a powerful business and revenue, and also a really fantastic support of building more sustainable relationships. Done some great work with the Ministry of Social Development, humanising its process, working with beneficiaries. We're Collectibles. They're building a really global fan base off the back of building a really strong relationship with global fans. So that idea of business and customers working together is like the core component of our philosophy.
One thing that's quite sort of interesting and I suppose challenging for both of you is that a lot of that sustainability umbrella, there's a lot that nestles underneath it, but these are kind of big, chunky, complex challenges that also happen to have arrived, or our awareness of them has arrived at a time of a very sort of fragmented communications environment. And there's a couple of pieces to that, but let's start with, how do you given that reality that's the kind of old world that probably all of us grew up in, of more of a monoculture where, if you created a piece of work or a method of a business meeting a customer, that it was relatively easy to kind of put that in front of them, and the feedback mechanisms that might sort of dispute it or were relatively, they're much lower in the mix. How do you navigate that environment given just the huge complexity of it now?
It is a challenge, there is no doubt. Our advice to clients is to focus on their values. We have a very diverse society. Those, the people that these companies are wanting to employ are going to be attracted to a company with really strong values that align with their own personal values. So if you see something happening that doesn't align with those values, it makes sense for that company to call that out or to respond in a way that makes sense to that value system. So we really encourage clients to think about, we talk about a Southern Cross, the navigating stars. It's relevant to our country, and focus on that and not be swayed by some of the polarizing opinions that might be circulating, to really stay true to those values. And we are very lucky because we are working with purpose-driven companies that are very genuine in their commitment to that purpose. So it makes it a little easier. But there's a massive, massive job for comms to do to take people, whether it's internal staff, employees, contractors, customers, investors, local communities, mana whenua. There's a lot of relationships that need to be built based on that value system. So, internal comms is often overlooked. In our industry, we call it the Cinderella. It doesn't get a whole lot of love. But actually, if you can create that bedrock of comms inside your organization and get alignment on, why you're doing what you're doing, what you stand for, then you'll find the confidence to take a stand as a brand. You talk about brand standing. Companies can't do that unless they have that amazing foundation internally.
So, David, getting back to that sort of emotional connection idea and sort of thinking about what Nikki was saying, the fact is that in this kind of environment that we're living in, the same object, the same message can be interpreted in quite wildly different ways by aspects of an audience. Do companies or organizations ultimately have to sort of basically pick a lane, or is there a way of kind of using your insights to appeal to different audience segments in different ways and ultimately still progress the whole?
Yeah, I think that's partially true. I think there's a step before that. This idea that you build a brand and you communicate to people. I think that's fraught with challenge, right? And I think this is what you're talking about. If you're a business, your values and your purpose and your intent, it's so important, and it has to be done with people. You have to develop that purpose and those values and that intent with the people that matter to you, and you have to be very clear about who those people are. And then when you, it's like having a business and all your only intention is to flog product. You're not going to get very far. And so business is entirely about working with people and not doing things to people, whether that be internally or externally or customers or partners or whatever the case is. If you take that paradigm forward and you build your business that way, then you've got a very good chance of being very successful, because people will join you and help you become successful because it's a shared values, shared belief situation. And that's a market change for so many people. Many people are in business in senior roles that were very much in the space of let's just sell things to people or flog it to people. And I think this is where it gets very sticky and very problematic. But business take on a role. We're doing this together. It's a very much a win-win. You can do great things when you take that approach. It requires a very, very different approach, though.
I mean that sort of connects up to one thing which I think is quite or at the core of this. I remember. Last year I went to a conference put on by IAG, and it was basically delivering just a big kind of state of the climate report. It's a huge piece of work for them, and the sort of subtext was that we're in this adaptation era, and huge chunks of New Zealand, their houses are going to become uninsurable, with the implication that they just can't really be where they are. 6 months on, we have the floods. and that is sort of made viscerally clear. Because some of these conversations, there's obviously this aspirational version, but there's also quite a confrontational thing that people won't want to hear. How do they, and I think this is probably both of you would have some interesting insights in this. How do businesses that have to have an uncomfortable conversation with customers or potential customers do that in a way that doesn't sort of alienate them? David, maybe you can sort of speak to that from a behavioural psychology perspective.
Well, I live in the Hawke's Bay now, and I didn't get impacted by flooding, but I have plenty of friends who were. So yeah, it is visceral for sure. Look, I think it's the same thing. If a business like an insurance business would say, "Hey, we're going to do this to you," it gets human beings being what they are. We don't react at all well to fear or demands or being told what to do or anything like that. And so you might say, "Oh, we'll have to do it with empathy." It's like, well, not even that actually. The question has to be done from a business. How do we do this together? How can we help you and you help us achieve a result that's going to be or achieve something that's going to be really beneficial for all of us? And I think that is the question and the conversation, which has to be an open conversation that needs to be had, rather than, "Hey, we're going to do this to you. This is what's going to happen. It's going to be bad, but hey, suck it up. It's going to," and that just never works. And so yet it hasn't really been the space that businesses operated in, but now it has to be. If we want to achieve anything, it has to be something where we share the solution, the development of the solution. As soon as a government or any business goes down the path of, "We're going to do this to you," guess what? It's going to blow up in everyone's face. It needs to be done with people, and it might not be pleasant, sure enough. But guess what? You have to get to a point where there's a solution there.
Nikki, are there examples with clients that you've worked with where, whether it's internal to the company or sort of external to society, they've chosen to or had no option but to have a conversation of that nature with their clients or customers?
Nothing in that sort of managed retreat adaptation space. However, major service change or if there's a particular issue that's impacting a customer negatively, the insight would be communication is at the heart of the response. And to David's point, this has to be co-created. So someone has to make a decision as well. I think part of the challenge is if there's no decision happening, people are left in that flight or fight response stage, and that's challenging. So really communication, even if there is no decision that can be drawn just yet, communicating where you're at in the process, what that process looks like, and being very clear at each point when you're reaching these milestones and what's coming next, so people can plan. It takes time to absorb sort of the process here. I think this is going to be one of the big conversations next year, and it's going to be from communities in the Hawke's Bay. It's going to be communities possibly in quite affluent suburbs in Auckland as well. So, and there's going to be a need for a lot of communication to affected individuals, affected communities, mana whenua. Everyone is going to have to be at that table and feel like they are part of a solution.
Yeah, which, often I think historically it was a very top-down sort of here is the sort of menu type situation, and that's probably the big profound change. And if you've got people in leadership positions who came up in a different era, you can see how that's something that would take a while to get to potentially. Nikki, I wonder if you could talk about a specific client that, you mentioned them before, a foundational client of yours, Toyota, which on some level, don't look like a classic sustainability story at one of the world's largest car manufacturers, but have actually been, I often think that if you want to look at for where real progress will happen, it's in the biggest organisations in the world because they've got the most room to affect kind of mass change, even though there's a lot of people who are deeply cynical about it. Tell me how you have worked with them and what you've seen from that organisation that makes you sort of believe, and then how you tell that story or get that story out into the public.
So for me, I mean, Toyota at every level, globally, locally, the sustainability ethos runs through that business. So for me, it's the hearts and minds, right? So on the one hand, it's the minds piece is that the science-based targets that they've set, and so putting themselves into that space where they have a target that they have to reach forces them to make hard decisions as a business. That is one thing that a lot of companies still need to do, is really assess what is the end game, how are we going to get there, and then actually make a plan and execute against it. Because what we see a lot of is targets but no action plan. Okay, so Toyota have done an incredible job, I think, as have, I would call out Air New Zealand as well, for setting the targets and having an actionable plan. In fact, the concrete industry would be another. They've just launched a roadmap, same thing. They've done the science. They've worked out the targets that they need to hit to become carbon neutral by 2050. And then they work back from that to how they're going to get there. So it has to be realistic. And these things have financial implications. So they are not taken lightly. It's the entire business that's across it as well. It's not siphoned off to sustainability. It's very much a company-wide process. The other thing I would say is on the mind side, so how you move customers towards adopting new technology that's more sustainable. Challenging, right? Because often there's a price premium. So, I mean, we've experienced just recently, in this country, we've had the rebate for electric vehicles. So it's enabled certain people to get into electric vehicles. That's a challenge, right? So what I guess I admire about Toyota is that they recognise that that's not a solution for every New Zealander, and they have partnered, they're trying to create mobility. They're transitioning from a traditional automotive business into a mobility company, and they want to take people with them. So they want to make mobility affordable. They want to make it accessible, and they want that technology to be low emissions. So that's the basis for decision making. And one thing they did recently was partner with the Tyndall Foundation and Akina and MSD, and they created this program called Waka Aranui, which is based in South Auckland. Toyota provides a hybrid low-emissions vehicle to families and who are participating in this program, and then Akina is measuring the impact that mobility solution has given to that family. The impact report has just come out, and we have seen that these families they're telling us that they can now get to doctor's appointments that in the past they wouldn't have been able to get to. They can engage in education and employment. So there is quite profound influence that mobility can have on a well society, and being a full participant in society. So to me, that I get fired up by that. I think that's really exciting, and we can scale it now. We've done the work; it's been measured. How can we go further, go faster? And of course, there's emissions savings as well. So that's the bonus, right? And I think the other key point I would make is around collaboration, because whilst one company can do a lot, and especially the bigger the company, the more impact they can have. However, the challenge is so vast that we won't be able to do it, company by company. We do have to actually collaborate, and not just industry competitors at an industry level, but also partnering with NGOs, partnering with charities, partnering with government, and that's, I think, the real focus now is how can we join up our strengths and really tackle these issues.
Do you feel like, because on the one hand, there's never been more sort of urgency or energy around it, but there's also, you get critiques from the left that it's not far enough, or a cynicism about a large-scale corporate that inevitably still sells trucks, its involvement, and from certain aspects of the right that this thing's not real, or at the very least, like, we should be, much later in the piece on motion that we are. Does the core of the business stay strong through that? And, you obviously have election campaigns which can make these issues quite live. Like, do you find that, especially throughout the span that you've been working, that you can sort of tell something about the fundamental character of a business by how they respond to those external factors?
There's no doubt we are getting caught up. There are culture wars. We're not immune to that here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. There's the key, I think, is to stay your course. To focus on that Southern Cross or the North Star, depending on what you're aligning to. But that is the key. And to constantly engage with people to find out what they're thinking and feeling. We do a lot of work with companies in that regard, where they know what they have their finger on the pulse, not just from traditional market research, but also from, understanding what are the material topics that are impacting people right now. So that's a key. You've got to get these insights, the work that David's doing. These are the kinds of things that will enable companies to really stay the course and move at speed.
So David, there's a client of yours, Stormy Fruit, which seemed to be quite an interesting example. Like, food waste is this perennial thing that it just sort of sits there in front of us as a society and doesn't seem to improve. And so many aspects of it are just kind of almost indefensibly stupid, and yet we don't change. Whereas Stormy Fruit seems to be like a classic example of taking insights like yours to try and step change how we relate to that product. Can you sort of drill into the sort of insight and how it was actioned with that business?
Yeah, so the company we were working with was a company called Golden Bay Fruit. They grow premium apples, like the world's best apples, and they ship them to Chinese markets. We're working with them, but we were also deeply interested in Chinese consumers. So we've done a lot of work with Chinese consumers, and so we joined up those two. Joined those two dots really. At that time, Golden Bay Fruit were affected with a 100 year hailstone. So we're talking hailstones that were the size of golf balls, which wrecked their crop just before it was due to be picked. They basically said to us, "Oh, well, we're done. I think we're out of business." And what we knew about Chinese consumers, that they were very, very concerned about the safety of food. So unlike ourselves, where we're not concerned at all about safety, our assumption is food will always be safe. Chinese consumers were far from it. Their concern was that food could be poisonous, had been so in many cases, and so so we had these two equal and opposite interactions going on. Consumers who are worried about safety of food, and Golden Bay Fruit selling premium apples that was basically not premium anymore because it had been affected by a hailstone. So, and really the apples had been dented. And one of my team said, "Well, why don't we create a brand called Stormy Fruit?" And Stormy Fruit is kissed by nature. And so what you had is a very authentic apple that had been, impacted by nature. And it took us a lot of effort to convince Golden Bay Fruit that maybe there was an opportunity where we could create this brand called Stormy Fruit. We could package the apples send it to China, to supermarkets, and perhaps it would be successful. And emotionally, this new brand, these apples, would really connect to people at a very powerful emotional level of safety and security. And as they said, okay, well, why don't we give it a try? And so we packaged up several containers, sent it to some supermarkets in Shanghai, and I got a text from the owner of Golden Bay Fruit, and it showed had some people on the ground there. It showed people queuing up around the block for this Stormy Fruit brand. And what it did is it emotionally connected to consumers who were needing safety from their food. And I think that was such a profound example of how an emotional need, if it's met, can be hugely connected behavioural economic play for New Zealand businesses in this case. So Stormy Fruit, fruit that was kissed by nature, bang on. It really resonated. Now, you can't you can't generate that. You can't create it. It just happened to be made that way. And so, it was such a powerful example of an emotional need being met.
No, it's an amazing story, and I guess shows that there is, even in circumstances which sort of feel catastrophic, that there's opportunity too. Finally, I just wanted to get both your perspectives on this, because there's these sort of dueling narratives at the moment that can feel like they're in conflict, that in some ways the hailstorm of high inflation and the sort of cost of living crisis running into all of these big longitudinal problems that nestle under that sustainability umbrella. Do you sense that sort of political economic focus on cost of living, which has implicitly, or actually sometimes explicitly, said we're just going to have to take a break from progress on those other goals? Has it sort of dented an overall interest in that? And if so, how would you sort of go about countering that from a kind of a broad emotional behavioural science or communication perspective?
Look, that's a great question. I think if you take the approach that sustainability initiatives are done to people or are done separately, like they're a little sidebar or a separate initiative, and therefore they could be turned off or on, then inevitably they will be turned off or on, depending upon the economic climate. Now, I think that's indicative of really the issue that we have with anything cause related. It becomes voluntary or perhaps only necessary when there's money, and I think that's the singular problem with thinking about sustainability or any cause related issue this way. If sustainability or any initiative is done with people, then it doesn't get turned off. It's an intent that has to be taken no matter what the economic climate. So people are involved and are engaged no matter what. And I think this is the point. If it's done with people and people are doing sustainability, we're doing this together, then I think no matter what happens, no matter what the political or economic climate, it's done together. And I think that's, communities and societies say, no, this is so important. We can't turn this off. We have to do this together. And so I think that's a paradigm shift, which we have to really engage. So sustainability is not done separately or communicated separately. It's done together with people. So I think that's such an important and it's a fundamental component of how you think about cause-related sustainability. You have to do it with people, co-create it, do it together, get people to make it thrive together. So I think that's sounds so simple, but it's a design process that has to change right from the get-go.
What about you, Nikki?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? So if you say you're a person who's been impacted by the floods this year, you're probably still dealing with the aftermath of that. So you're not turning off your response. So individually, I think there's other people out there, most of New Zealand, who are really, really struggling with this cost of living. And so you go into that scarcity mindset, right? Of like, how can I save? And sometimes you do drop the thing that could have an environmental benefit because there was a price premium attached to that. So I think that is true, that is happening. However, at a corporate level, there is more momentum than ever. So we see this in the Climate Leaders Coalition. We see this with the compliance through, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and the soon-to-be-released nature-related disclosures. So there's a momentum building at that corporate level, and the challenge is that intersection with cost of living. But there is a total interdependency between the E and the S in ESG, and it's really hard to ignore one, really. We obviously find in that survey that Kantar put out earlier this year, the Better Future study, that was quite shocking for a lot of us in the industry because cost of living was so dominant and climate change had dropped so far down in terms of people's priorities, which was totally understandable, but also a little bit frustrating because you want to keep moving, right? And you know the size of the challenge and the time frame associated with that challenge. So, but that's the reality. That is what we are dealing with. So that's the challenge. In fact, people in that survey, even if they had been directly impacted by the floods, so directly impacted, they were still putting climate change further down, which suggests that also there perhaps is still, with climate change, there's still that thought around it being collective action, not necessarily individual responsibility. I think there's something in that. And so what I love recently, a great example recently, Auckland Council initiative to recycle our food scraps. Low effort required because the bin turned up at our house and we just started composting food scraps. And for people who are already composting food scraps, like we've got a compost bin at home, so I was already doing it. I was thinking, what value is this going to add? It's just going to duplicate my current effort. But actually I can compost a lot more than I could before. So there was a benefit that I hadn't perceived there to be. And I thought the communication of that service change was extraordinary because they made it very attractive for us to start composting, and they gave us this future vision where, this will help us, plant more, grow more crops and create more food. So I thought that was quite a successful execution, which both ticks the box on saving money because you're wasting less food, but also has this environmental benefit.
Yeah, it's good to kind of end on a note where there is a way of threading that needle, because it can feel like on some level there has been a kind of vacation of the space. But great to hear that. And the fact that, elections come and go, but the momentum at that corporate level is, is kind of, it feels unstoppable, and that, I guess that's where the legislative piece comes in. Hey, thank you both, David and Nikki, for coming on the fold today. I really appreciate it, and just like a fascinating, knotty topic, and kind of the most important job in the world right now.
It's a pleasure, and it's always great to discuss these topics from different perspectives as well, to build our understanding and collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think it's so good to have places where you can have conversations that I think are so important like this. So no, thank you. I really appreciate having us join. That's really, really cool.
And thank you for O Media for sponsoring cool stuff like this.
Very much endorse that. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.